maybe questionable for me.
Okay. So yeah, if we can, I think taking turn, I think I don't hear any objections to not reviewing draft budgets today. So if that makes sense to everybody, let's move past that to the meeting scheduled for November 1st.
One quick question, Jennifer. Maybe go into your question there. Is there any benefit to reviewing the debt service side of the budget, since those are largely separate and unimpacted by any IGA activity? And Shelby, that's maybe a question for you. I don't know if there's any benefit of that or not.
There could be, and I'm happy to review those if that's what the board wants to do. To Andy's point earlier, there are questions from D2 on the debt service side, just specifically with the mills and payments. So we could spend time here. I would just leave it up to the boards with how you want to handle that.
Okay. I'll throw out a suggestion. I know everybody's here, so notwithstanding we all made time to show up, I like what Jennifer's suggesting and maybe not cover budgets today. And I got a couple other reasons for that. One, it's going to get split up between the districts as I work with Matt and Jamie on getting that agreement put together. Plus, if we can push this after the 7th, we'll know if Prop HH passes or not. And we can have maybe a more efficient budget hearing too, where we're not making some picks on whether or not which revenue version we're going to have for next year. And that gives everybody time to make the new budgets, work on some of the nitty gritty on some of the logistics of the D1 and D2 new budgets and how that's going to work. And hopefully it can be a lot more productive if we reschedule, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks. We could do a marathon day too, annual meetings, budgets. we could do a big one.
Thanks, Jeff. I think that's helpful. And that is a great point with knowing after November 7th, what the lay of the land is with Proposition HH and Senate Bill 303. That would be very helpful, I'm sure, for Shelby and her team to actually know where that is. So the first question I have on the November 1st meetings is, we had also scheduled November 1st to be your sort of new statutory compliance, what I call the town hall meeting. There does need to be at that meeting a presentation about public improvements within the districts. And so I'm happy to still hold those meetings on Wednesday and check those boxes and get that done. I would just ask a question to the group. I think probably Oakwood and or district management are best suited to talk about the public improvements. And so since that's a larger component of that meeting, I just wanted to make sure that timeline would still work for Oakwood and or management to pull together a brief presentation just to discuss the status of public improvements.
Yeah, I'll need to review that with the Oakwood team, and I don't know, Greg, if you have any comments on that at this point in time. But that's next Wednesday at 2 o'clock. It's planned. What, 2 o'clock or 3?
Yep, that was at 2, set for at 2 o'clock.
Okay.
And it would be sort of nice, from my perspective at least, to just get those cleared off, and we would at least be done with that statutory requirement. It doesn't have to be. There's no requirement for the depth of information that's provided, but I mean, I obviously want to have something that's slightly informative just on public improvements that have been completed and what is planned in the future.
Yeah, Greg, I'm not sure if you have any comments on that at this point in time, but
it's fine.
Okay, so we'll. Sorry, Brendan.
Oh no, it's just confirming. It sounds like that's, we can pull something together by that time.
Great. So we'll do the town hall. I'm going to suggest for ease of administration that we just convert that, if we're not going to have any public hearings on the budgets, to a fully virtual meeting. If that works for board members, it sounds like at least one board member. I know we had several board members respond saying that worked better for them. I know last year the hope was we might do an in-person meeting, but unless I hear objections, I'm going to proceed with making that Zoom only. All right.
So,
we're making progress here.
One quick question, Jennifer, about so I know the public improvements is one piece of it, but it looks like there also needs to be in that presentation the unaudited financial statements, your debt revenue and expenditures and all that. So are we preparing that as well, Shelby, for for next week, as part of that presentation being combined with the improvements?
Yes, we would
Yep.
be.
Okay.
Yeah, so we would just get those all completely done. All right, with that, I know District 2 has some business that they would like to consider at a meeting. So my suggestion to District 2 would be that we still hold a District 2 meeting at 3 p.m. next week to deal with at least some of the business. I'm not sure that a public hearing in the budget makes much sense, although we'll keep it on the agenda because we did publish for it at this point. Do any other boards have any business that they think it would be useful to have the meetings on the 1st to deal with? And I can bring up agendas. I think you've all been provided with them, but I mean, typically what we do at the annual meeting is budgets are the big portion of it. And then there's also, approval of minutes, your annual resolutions, which are not time sensitive, and engagement of service providers. I think that those, at least the service providers aspect, is likely to change quite a bit based on scope of the services being provided by District 4 for what would be 3 and 5 only potentially. And then Districts 1 and 2 have some work to do to figure out how that's going to look. So to me, at least from what I'm understanding, it seems premature for those districts to meet to consider any of those items at this point. And so I guess I'm looking for anyone to disagree with me or tell me that they have items that should be considered at next week's currently planned meetings.
So Jennifer, I want to make sure I'm thinking about this correctly. And this might answer some of your questions. So the way I've been thinking about this and what we briefly talked about with our special counsel on District 1 is that from a budget perspective, District 1 will pursue, we're obviously pursuing a settlement agreement with Oakwood and District 4, and our budget would follow the form of that settlement agreement. But from a, we do still have an IGA with District 4 to provide services currently. So it feels like District 4 still needs to have a process in place to engage service providers until we're fully separated, settlement agreement inked, a new IGA inked and done. So I agree with you. I feel like for District 1, it feels premature to engage any service providers because currently we don't have the need or power to do so from a legal perspective until we have a settlement agreement and new IGA. Am I thinking about that all correctly?
I think you are. And I think from a District 4 perspective, I mean, these service providers have been in place. We usually do renewals. Sometimes Jerry and Brittany and the team, have suggestions for changes to service providers. But to the extent that we are able to get sort of all of that stuff inked, which I think will become clear in the next month or so as Jeff and Matt and the team work through, revisions to IGA and those processes, it's potential that those service providers' scopes would be changed, and or maybe District 1 wants to use some of the same providers. All of that's kind of in the works right now. So I'm not sure it makes sense from my perspective, to meet to re-engage those service providers next Wednesday, when we're going to have to meet to do budgets sometime in the next 6 weeks anyway. I think to the extent that that picture becomes more clear as we get closer to the finish line, it would make more sense to get those scopes revised. And so to me, it seems silly to authorize all these engagements now if potentially they're going to be, the scope of services will change.
Yep. Okay. I completely agree with everything you said there. I think the important thing is that we, obviously we're all working towards, working on a settlement expediently. That process has been slow though. I just want to make sure we don't have a gap in like snow removal where we just don't have a service provider engaged because we've pulled this off the agenda. So I think as long as we keep that in sight, then I think we're good. And then to your other question about business at next week's meeting, I don't have anything in particular for District 1. Jeff, correct me if you feel differently about that. I do think, not that I can speak for District 2, but I do think it would be important for District 2 to at least have a discussion on how they want to structure their budget. Obviously, District 1 and District 4 are pursuing a settlement that contemplates District 1 and 2 together. District 1 plans to budget that way, but if District 2 goes a different direction, we're going to have budgets that the sum of the parts don't equal the whole. So I just want to make sure that District 2 feels aligned on the path District 1's going down from a budgeting perspective.
Yeah, Josh, I'd agree with you. It's Mitchell from President District 2 that I think it's important that we keep that meeting, and sounds like we have some major decisions to make on our November 1st meeting as well. So I would agree.
Yeah. And Mitchell, I can coordinate with you, but I know obviously you want to engage special counsel. I did get that engagement letter from you yesterday. We might check with your special counsel to see if they're available to attend part of that meeting, and I can drop off so that, after they're engaged, you can have some of those discussions. But I think it is important for District 2 to definitely use next week's meeting since it's already on the books for that purpose.
Yeah.
And then a question, Mitchell, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to actually avoid about 700 emails here. So one comment on that engagement letter, and Brandon and I already talked about this morning, because District 4 would need to be the payor on that engagement, similar to what was arranged with District 1, and I don't see that contemplated in there. So I'm going to send out an email. I will send out an email looping Matt Ruland as special counsel for District 4, Brandon, you, Mitchell, and your proposed special counsel into an email, because District 4 will need to improve that engagement as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And Jennifer, can I ask who this proposed special counsel is?
Oh, Joan Fritchie.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, of course you can ask Matt. And Brandon,
Wondering who we'll be working with.
Yeah. And to that end, Brandon, it might make sense for 4 to have a meeting for at least maybe the limited purpose of potentially approving that engagement so things can move forward.
Yeah, that could work.
Okay.
And then I'll jump in, Josh and Mitch. Mitch, so you guys are talking about logistics. I think after that meeting next week, then D1 and D2 it might be a scenario where there's just going to be a lot of meetings over the next couple months to iron all the details out, and we're all just going to have to work, try to fit into our schedules. Then maybe D1 and D2 have a meeting to talk about, okay, how is this going to work between the two of us based upon what's happening in the community and next year. So I think we're just gonna have to take it in steps, I think, and see how it all shakes out as we go forward.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Okay. I've taken up a lot of time with me talking in my agenda for my revised agenda for today. Jeff, Matt, any logistics that you think it would be helpful to discuss while we're just kind of all on the line here? And I guess, sorry, I would also open up Jerry, Brittany, if there are any service providers that, to Josh's point, are time sensitive, please let me know. It doesn't have to be right this second, but let me know, because I think I will probably have a very truncated agenda for D4 next week. So let me know your thoughts on that.
We don't have any pressing at the moment, and our snow contract with Brightview actually goes to the end of December this year, so nothing is pressing at the moment.
All right, perfect, thank you. Back to the original part of my question, Matt and Jeff, any logistics that you think would be helpful to jump through while we're all on the line?
Man, I don't think so. I think it'll just be an email with a lawyer email about some logistics on our end to draft documents, but we've already got that chain started. Yeah,
and I think the intent is Jamie, counsel for Oakwood, is going to take the initial stab at drafting the settlement agreement, which has all the terms in it. And once we get that finalized, obviously everything will start snowballing from there.
Yeah.
I'll work with Jeff on the IGA because I think it's going to eventually we're going to need some input on how D1 and D2 want to split some things up, if that's going to be in this IGA or if it's a separate one. We have to figure out those logistics. But I think it's more like to Jeff's point, Jeff, Jamie, and I, and then when Joan gets engaged, we'll be communicating together to get those items drafted, and then moving forward with consent from the town for the fee. And I think Jeff's going to prepare a notification for us to review. So I think we're already going down the path in coordinating in terms of the lawyer side of it, and we're communicating with our board. I assume Jeff's doing the same. So I think everyone's in the loop at this point.
Great. And then Matt, because D4 hasn't met recently, we can take this offline, but I will need to post an agenda today with the town. So if there are D4 items that you would like on next week's agenda, let me know.
I would like to be optimistic and say we will, but the reality, I'm not sure we're going to have any items like to be approved at that point, other than maybe consenting to Joan's engagement.
Okay, sounds good. And I do have, we had taken on sort of a review of property records a couple of years ago, maybe 18 months, 24 months ago. So I have an Excel spreadsheet that I think you, Jeff, and you, Matt, will find very helpful, that summarizes deeds and conveyances and plats and all sorts of things. And I think that'll be very helpful in the moving forward and trying to separate out property. So
I think
I'm
so
happy
too.
to
One of my notes here is who owns what and who's going to own what. So that will be helpful to know who owns it now and who's going to own it later. So that'd be wonderful.
Yes.
Thank
So
you.
I'm happy to share that with both of you, and we have all the backup documents. So I will get that to you to save you the brain damage of going through it. It hasn't been updated in like 18 months or so, but it'll at least be a shortcut.
Perfect.
Great.
All right. Shelby, do you want to touch on debt service? I guess I'd open up to the District 2 board members. It sounds like there's some debt service questions from D2. If you all want to stay on, and obviously it's a public meeting, anyone can stay on, but unless any of the other boards have anything they want to go over, maybe we go over some of the debt service questions from D2.
Yeah, we can do that, and perhaps D1 as well, to the extent there's any questions on the debt service mill levy that's in the proposed 2024 budgets. And then that way, once we get to the next meeting, we can focus our attention on the operations side.
All right.
Alyssa, I don't want to step on your toes. Do you want to present? Do you want me to? Up to you.
Sure, I can present. We can start on the property tax summary page, which is 2 pages up.
And I'm sorry, Alyssa, just before everyone starts dropping off, timeline for budget hearings. What are folks thinking? This will save us 7,000 additional scheduling emails. Are we thinking towards the end of November-ish? Seems reasonable. I mean, we can also do beginning of December. I don't want to push it out insanely long. I just get a sense for what everyone thinks makes sense from a schedule perspective.
End of November sounds too late, isn't it?
Well, the board has to have a budget approved by year end, and it has to certify mill levies by December 15th, assuming Prop HH doesn't pass. So December 15th is sort of the unofficial deadline, is what I'll say for right now. So end of November is not too late. We could actually go all the way into the second week of December.
I think that's reasonable, Jennifer. I guess maybe not to overcomplicate this. One of the complicating factors for the D1-D2 budget is this is probably a Timberline to do, is separating costs that were once on a consolidated basis, like snow removal, into a D1-D2 only budget. I guess the question for Timberline is what does the timeline look like for that? I don't imagine that's an overly complicated exercise, but I think that's going to be a significant driver on the cost side of our D1-D2 budget.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult, I would say, because we've always done it just combined. So we would have to meet with, our snow contractor, and well, any service provider really that has been providing services for both districts that roll up under 4. And we would have to figure out a way how to separate out that invoicing for services that are provided within the boundaries of 1 versus boundaries of 2. I mean, we can do it. It's going to take some effort.
Yeah, so I think that timeline is important to this process. Does it feel like that's accomplishable before back up, Shelby's probably got to have that data for at least a week before any budget hearing. So, does, I guess, 3 to 4 weeks to accomplish that sound reasonable?
Yeah, I think so.
And from a
So I'm
lawyer
good at-
perspective, the other lawyers can tell me differently. I don't represent any, D2 or D1, but you can set your budget hearing. That's the final step in all of this. We can put that at the end, late November, early December. You're going to have meetings and a work session like you were going to have today to go over the budget probably before that. Just you ultimately have to rubber stamp the final budget or have the budget hearing and finally approve it before December 15th. So we can set that later, and then that's kind of your end stop, and then you can do all the work before then.
Yeah, and I was going to just throw out, just because it's strangely a day where I literally have nothing on my calendar, which is making me think my calendar is broken. But how does 11/29 look for people? And I guess I will start with you, Shelby, and Alyssa.
I right now am generally open after 10 a.m. that day.
Me too. Available.
All right, board members, can you accommodate a meeting at 10 a.m. on the 29th? Is it anyone that cannot accommodate that?
Well, I'm gonna say I can accommodate it, but I'm a little pessimistic on it being ready and that fast.
It might be a study session to go over the budgets. It might be a work
Maybe.
session.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I'm
then-
just trying to pencil something in.
Oh yeah. Well, I think that makes sense, and that still gives us 2 weeks to publish and have the public hearing on the actual budgets.
So
Yeah.
I'm wondering
need
if it might behoove us, because I agree it's going to be multiple study sessions that probably need to be had once this gets kind of worked out. Knowing in past how many times this has taken us, would it be more behooved to basically schedule a reoccurring weekly meeting, at least for the boards and CLA team, maybe not needing lawyers at the beginning piece, but doing the week of the 6th, the week of the 13th, the 20th, and 27th, just so there's time reserved and blocked. And we have that as study sessions, like something 4 weeks in a repeat to kind of do the study, adjust as needed, and then setting a date early December to actually do have the true budget hearing for the public, and then move forward with passing that. But that way we have a reoccurring on the book. It's there. We don't have to worry about doing the calendar invites each time. We know we're going to need D4 in the beginning. Once then, split D1, D2. Have Shelby's team probably have. Sorry, my mind is full of crud, but Timberline there as well. To finalize things, we can then spend those 4 weeks getting things kind of buttoned up, and then go into December, early December, for public hearing.
I mean, I guess I would open that up to everyone else's thoughts. I can tell you, and I know I heard you say you don't need lawyers. Knowing how my schedule looks, I know that Shelby and her team are also on a lot of those same meetings. I don't think it would be humanly possible for me to add 4 more meetings into my schedule over the next 4 weeks. But as you said, I'm also not part of the budgeting process. So I guess I would open it to other people to see what their thoughts are. I'm also sort of hearing from Jeff and Matt that we're not even really going to know the lay of the separation land for a couple of weeks. So at least some of those early dates may not be needed, but it's not a bad thought, Jason. Anytime I can save the headache of having to schedule meetings for my team. I really appreciate it because I know Megan pulls her hair out trying to get these meetings set.
I don't want to be pessimistic. I think we actually have a big outline. I just say once we have like a draft of the actual settlement agreement, everybody's largely happy with it, then I feel like we can really pull the trigger on everything else. I don't think that's going to be too difficult because we already did the hard work, frankly.
And I agree with Jeff. I think the main sticking point terms have been resolved. So I think in terms of D1 and D2 to be able to start negotiating and figuring out who's doing what, I think that can start sooner than later, and that we're headed that direction. I don't foresee this stalling, knock on wood. So I think we can move forward. Those conversations can happen without, Jennifer or Jeff or myself involved in the budget stuff. So I think you guys can continue that. And I like the idea of setting a budget hearing for, early December as a later date, sometime before December 15th, as here's our budget hearing. Now we all have to work to that date to get everything going until then.
I haven't heard it mentioned, but as far as the budget for such things as snow removal and even the landscaping, I haven't heard anybody mention District 3. The carriage homes have a separate budget for snow removal, if I understand it right. It's not actually part of D2. They have a separate expense because they get their driveways plowed, unlike everybody else in Erie Highlands. Is that right or wrong? And I've seen their little strips of grass being mowed by a commercial entity on, their front little patch of grass that a couple of them have. Not all four have grass, but some do that are street facing, and I see that it gets mowed.
That is correct, that the carriage houses have separate services. I believe that those are within District 2, though.
I thought they were, I know that the carriage homes are inside District 2, but I thought they had a separate budget / line item
They
for
do.
snow removal that's under District 3.
No, Keith, we report all of that under a separate fund within District 4 currently. So the revenues and all the expenditures for the carriage homes are tracked separately, outside of the property tax revenues, any additional contemplated fee, and just the overall administrative and operations expenditures of the district.
But I guess to Keith's point, so is D2 overseeing that fee and creating the budget based on that fee, or is D3 overseeing that fee? Or is
D3 is not involved. D3 is not involved in it at all. It's currently under D4's budget.
D4.
I think
so D4
whether or not D2 is taking that on or D4 is keeping that, I think is probably going to be part of the discussion that's going to happen once D2 actually has an attorney engaged and can think through those things. So I'm hearing 11/29 might be a little bit early for a budget hearing. I'm going to pencil this date in since I didn't get any vehement objections as a study session. Okay, I see a couple of nods and no one's throwing things at me yet, so good.
Great idea. Let's put it on the calendar. 10 o'clock study session on the 29th.
Yeah, I will get out
Love
an
it.
invite to the entire universe. And then for a budget hearing, I'm just selfishly looking at days on my calendar where I can say, like, I can make anything work. So I'm going to look at, this is pretty late, but 12/12. And I'll start again with Shelby and Alyssa.
I'm available.
I'm sorry, Shelby.
I'm open all day.
All right. Anybody with major limitations on 12/12?
1:30 to 2:30. I'm not available. Otherwise, I'm good.
What were the times again?
We're currently in the all-day range other than 1:30 to 2:30.
Oh,
10 a.m. would be great if we like the 10 o'clock.
Yeah, I was gonna say I was 10 a.m. Oakwood folks, can you accommodate a 10 a.m. on 12/12?
Yes.
So I hate to be.
I can't do 10. I can do 10:30.
10:30.
I know most of the resident homeowners have day jobs. Would 3 p.m. be a better time? We do this as volunteer work, so I do know it's harder because we do have the contractors, but it's easier to miss work in the afternoon than mornings or have that block.
That is a fair point. 3 o'clock. Any major opposition to 3 o'clock?
Works for me.
All right, I'm going to call this a public hearing for all of the districts at 3 p.m. And notwithstanding the previous desire a year ago to make these things in person, it doesn't seem like in person is actually viable for most folks these days. So I'm setting these as Zoom meetings unless I get any major opposition on that. All right, great. I'm sorry. I will stop interrupting Alyssa and Shelby, your attempts to go over the budget. I'm sorry. It's a little bit disjointed today because I didn't know what we were actually doing until this morning. So back to you, and I will stop talking.
All right, no worries. Thanks. Okay, so I'll focus primarily on our debt service, but I'll just quickly start off for anyone unfamiliar with our budgets, just a quick overview of the format. On all of the drafts on every page, we have provided 6 columns. The first column on the left is our actual 2022 numbers. Our next 3 columns represent 2023. We have our 2023 budget, our actual numbers as of July 31st, and then our estimated numbers through the end of 2023. And then our last 2 columns represent our 2 budget scenarios for 2024. Budget 1 right now is if Proposition HH does not pass, and budget 2 is if it does pass. So we have our property tax summary page right now for District 1. As I mentioned, we have our 6 columns at the top. I also recommend reading this page in 3 sections from top to bottom. We have our assessed valuation for the district at the top. Our middle section are mill levies that are imposed last year and proposed for 2024. And then our last section are property taxes generated from that AV and mill levy. So for District 1, you can see regardless of whether or not Prop HH passes, there will be an increase in AV. Budget 1, about 20% increase, and budget 2, about 14%. And since we're focusing on debt service, we are recommending that our debt service can decrease to 25 under both scenarios from 30 last year.
I hate to ask this, Alyssa, but I suck at math for that decrease from 52 mils to 48 mils. Do we know what that is, like, per 100,000 of house valuation? Like, as a quick savings that we could say to the homeowners?
I could certainly get back to you on that. Just do a quick calculation and get that over to you.
Yeah, I know it's only 4 mils, but just even forward to say, hey, we're per $100,000 valuation, you're looking at saving $20 or something like that. Just so mils is kind of benign to me, where USD is helpful to explain.
Jason, 4 mils, and I don't know if that's exactly what it is, but 4 mils would be about $27 per $100,000 in value.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Shelby. All right. Any other questions on this page? All right, then we can go to our debt service page. So on our debt service fund, we have our revenues. Our main source is really coming from that debt service mill levy. And then as far as our expenses, we do have our paying agent fees, which are fees to the trustee for the bonds, which stay consistent every year. And then our obligations on the 2020 bonds. So we have our principal and interest payment. And with the 25 mils, we are able to cover our obligations on the 2020 bonds. And then if you see that row at the bottom, we are able to maintain our reserve fund of $278,100 and then have a little bit of a surplus at the end of the year 2024. So that is where we calculated that we're able to decrease the mill levy and still be in a good spot to cover our debt service requirements and maintain our reserve. So any other questions or more detail you'd like me to go into?
Why was there such a difference between the actual 2023 ending fund at 714 versus the estimated at 390? So just because the pricing we haven't paid by July, like at 714 versus 390 for the actual versus estimated.
Because of bond interest and principal payments. So interest payments are made on June 1st and December 1st, and principal payments are made on December 1st every year. So as of July, we only made our first interest payment, but by the end of the year in December, we'll be making the rest of our interest and principal payments, which will bring us to that 390.
Okay. I figured as much. Just wanted to make sure I wasn't going crazy.
No worries.
So it looks like we're only adding 3,000 into the surplus, correct? If we're looking at budget 1, with going to 25 mils.
Correct.
Okay.
All right, if we want to go to District 2, there's no other questions. All right, so we can start with our property tax summary page. So for District 2, under budget 1, it just looked like the assessed value will increase about 47% from last year. Under budget 2, the assessed value will increase about 45%, so significant increase under both. So for our debt service mill levy, pursuant to the bond indentures, the district is required to impose the maximum 50 mills as adjusted. So those numbers, those 58.342 and the 58.843 are those adjusted numbers. And subsequently, we can't keep it the same as last year. I know Andy had a question about that, or decrease it from these adjusted amounts per the bond documents.
Yeah, you have, I've run calculations on that.
Yeah, so to
the
clarify,
difference between my number and your number, if we keep it the same, is $30,000. I can't imagine you need to increase the mill levy 4%. With the valuation increases that we've had to capture $30,000. Do you dip into the two? What's that amount? $948,000 at all during the year?
the reserve.
Yeah. If you don't dip into the 948,000, why would you raise the debt service millage?
It just is the it's required for upon the bond issuance, there's required pledged revenue towards the bonds. And the definition of your senior required mill levy is the 50 as adjusted.
Well,
which
yeah, but your debt service, what schedule you on?
So this is just our property tax.
Okay, well, you need to get to the other schedule.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, and just also to clarify, for the adjustments to the mill levy, I know you had another question. They are based on changes to the assessment rates for each property type. So I believe you had suggested a calculation that was only factoring in the residential assessment rate change, but currently the assessment rates are changing for commercial, for state assessed, for vacant land, and also for pipeline. So that's all included in that adjustment, just for clarification.
I don't know, you got me confused there. You're working off of 12,580,000, correct?
Correct. I'm just talking about our calculation for
Right.
the mill levy adjustment.
But I run some numbers and I get 703,000 or leaving it at the same level. You've got plenty enough money to keep the 948 intact and increase the surplus fund.
So, Alyssa, can I step in really quick? So,
Yeah.
Andy, you know, we believe that under the bond indenture, the district is required to adjust the mill levy for changes to the assessment rates. You know, what we've put together is based on our calculations and our recommendation. It still falls to the District 2 board. You know, I would look to legal counsel to potentially advise, you know, if you and the other board members want to certify a lower rate than what we've proposed to you. But just wanted to point out that is ultimately your decision. We just believe that under the bond indentures, the district has a requirement to adjust it.
Okay, you're saying that you adjust each ratio for residential, commercial, state assessed, vacant, and high.
Correct.
You did a 5 adjustment.
Yeah, yep, all within one calculation, but it does look at what was the assessment rate, you know, as of the service plan date, what's the assessment rate now for each of those property classifications to adjust up to what we would consider the new maximum mill levy.
But that's a 4% increase. So your multiplier is 1.04 something.
Alyssa and I can share the kind of calculation outputs with you via email. That might provide a little bit more color on what that looks like as well.
But one interesting coincidence is the multiplier they get from 55.94 to 58,342. The same multiplier that you use for the general mill levy. Same calculation again, right? You did 5 ratios rather than I did 1.
I don't know that I'm totally following Andy. So let's we'll share the calculation with you via email as a follow up here, and then if we.
But I would like you to look at would keeping the same mill rate satisfy keeping the debt surplus fund intact, and also satisfy increasing the surplus fund.
We can run those numbers for you.
I understand that you're doing a calculation on each of the 5 numbers. I didn't consider it that way. I just took it the mass number for your rate times the 12 million. Figured out how much money you'd have at the end of May, 62% of that amount. That was enough to pay the interest. You collect the other 38% later on to pay the December 1st. To me, it looked like you had sufficient money without changing the rates. I'm just trying to represent the residents who just got hit with a high assessment change. I don't see the reason to add a little more insult into increasing that rate. That's all.
Yeah, I completely understand your point. We can run those numbers for you and let you know the impact of that. I again would recommend either consulting with district general counsel, your special counsel, or even bond counsel before the board makes a decision on that.
Right.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm not muted. I'm not muted. Okay. To that point, yeah, I'm happy to look at it, Shelby. But as I'm sure you suspect, I would want bond counsel to advise the board if they were going to do something that the accountants weren't recommending vis-a-vis their obligations under the indenture. So, happy to chase that to ground if that's something that District 2 desires. We have about 6 weeks until our budget hearing and the final mill certification. So happy to look at that.
All right, so if we want to go to our debt service page. So our main revenue here is going to come from that debt service mill levy. Then we do have some income coming from arch system development fees. Then we have our paying agent fees as far as expenses, which stay consistent every year. And then our obligations on the 2018 A bonds. We have interest and principal payments in 2024. which then at the bottom, it does maintain our reserve of $948,238, and then does increase the surplus a bit from 2023. So I will point out this is the first year that property tax revenue generated does cover our interest and principal payments on the 2018 A bonds. So that is a good sign.
And Alyssa, is there a minimum requirement for the surplus fund to be funded?
There's not a minimum, there is a maximum, which I'm about to sort of go through.
Oh.
Yeah, no problem. So I know that Andy had a question about the 2018 B and C bonds. And as you guys can see, there are going to be no payments on these bonds next year in 2024. So first of all, those bonds are cash flow bonds, meaning they have no regularly scheduled principal or interest payments, and payments won't start being made until the funds are available. And in order for funds to be available, there is a specific flow of funds that was determined upon the bond issuances. So before payments can start being made, the revenue generated in this fund needs to first maintain that reserve fund, that $948,000. It needs to cover the current year obligations on the 2018 A bonds. And then it needs to fill the surplus fund to the maximum amount of $1,172,500. So as you can see next year, we are maintaining our reserve fund. We are generating revenue to cover our bond interest and principal payments on the A bonds. But until our surplus fund reaches that maximum amount of $1,172,500, we won't be making payments on those B and C bonds.
Just another point. Specific ownership tax, system development fees, and interest income. Those items are considered in setting the debt rate or not considered in setting the debt rate, middle rate. It sounds as though they're not considered.
That's correct.
Okay, which means there's a lot of money coming in that the only purpose is for coming in is to go to the surplus fund. We have to cover the debt service with the property taxes, the debt service. Can't use any of the other funds. Is that what
No.
I'm getting?
So they're all available revenues to be used for the debt service payments, but
not for calculation of the mill levy.
the mills. You're correct. Yep.
Which makes
and
legal sense, but no common sense. You could have $1 million setting a system development fee and you can't use it. You still have
can use it.
50 points.
Yeah, I mean, Andy, again, I completely understand the point you're making and where you're coming from with this. With how these bonds were structured, the system development fees, all those other revenues outside of just the property taxes go towards filling that surplus fund and then ultimately to paying the B and C bonds as well. So it's all part of the larger picture.
Are we ever going to recover? No. With these threes in mind, you're always going to be increasing the debt service and the general mill levy.
So the debt service
take advantage of the other funds until they become $1.7 million.
The debt service mill levy is, only gets adjusted to the extent there are changes to the assessment rates. So we've had several of those in the last few years. Before that, there was a really long period where those didn't change, and therefore that debt service mill levy wouldn't have changed during that time. I would also just point out, and I know you're aware of this, the specific ownership taxes, the system development fees, and interest income are highly variable. Those are based off of projections and estimates. Interest rates have increased, substantially over the last 18, 24 months, wherever we are in the year at this point. But, any of that can change as well. So, again, I understand your points and where you're coming from.
But with respect to the B and the C bonds, there's no mention in the budget of what the debt amount is. The year 22, 23, or possibly 24. Will you
Yeah.
include a paragraph on that?
Yep, Alyssa and I discussed that too, and we have a table that's included in the annual audit. We'll just bring forward a similar table to that to show the anticipated balances as of 2023 and 2024 on that unpaid interest. So we'll bring that in and you'll see that on the next version.
Because any product of the budget is that thing going, that's certified by you guys going to the state, or to the county. On the
This
three,
doesn't count.
right, including the two that are 0, 0. So that's why I thought it should be mentioned in the budget.
Yeah, it was a great point, and we'll add a table in disclosure about that.
All right, thank you very much. I don't mean to be sound, you
No,
did a
you-
lot of work, I appreciate it.
Of course.
45 years of my life was on your side of the desk.
Yeah,
I'm
totally.
on the other side.
Yeah, yep, no problem, Indy.
This is
So
Keith.
legally and common sense may not always coincide, is what I'm afraid is happening.
This is Keith. I have additional questions on this whole surplus fund, the bonds and stuff. So you're saying we can't make any payments to the B and C bonds until our surplus fund is at $1 million. Yet we're gaining debt at $1 million a year on those two bonds. Like last year, if I remember the audit, debt from 22 to 23 went up over $1 million. So now we owe $1 million more than we did a year ago because of those two bonds, and we can't pay them. Did I read that right? And did I hear that right?
In general, yes, Keith.
So
And
when are we ever going to have enough in our surplus fund? After we pay off the A bond? Is that when we're actually expected to pay on the B and C bond? And by then, I mean, they're going to be like, they're going to go up 20,000%.
yeah, so
Shelby, what's the call date?
It would be 5 years, so it would be 2023. And you know, we'll reach out to, I think I talked about this with Andy and Keith previously. We'll reach out to the underwriter that did the 2018 bonds and see if they've run any numbers. We're just, as everybody knows, not in a great interest rate environment right now, but we'll check on that and see if they feel like there's any possibility or benefits to looking to do a refinance. Because that often happens, you know, with districts that issue bonds, you know, before really any houses are there, then it's, you know, generally intended that the district would then refinance at a later date once there's credit history there and, you know, kind of near build out. So we'll check with the underwriter. But Keith, and I don't have, you know, actual numbers in front of me. There was a cash flow forecast done in conjunction with the 2018 bonds, which just kind of tries to project out, you know, what are the payments both on the senior bonds as scheduled, and then once that surplus fund is filled, how does that flow to the Bs and Cs eventually? So in theory, at some point that surplus fund would be filled to the maximum, and then while the district is still paying on those A bonds, there would be, you know, available funds to start paying on those B bonds. And then once those B bonds are paid in full, then available revenues would flow to the C bonds. So there hasn't been a refresh on that forecast. So I would say let us start with reaching out to the underwriter that had done the previous bonds, unless there's unless the board would want to reach out to somebody else on that and get their thoughts. And then if not, we could potentially consider kind of a refresh to the cash flow forecast if that's something the district would want to consider.
Yeah, because I would think that, as we know, a lot of that has gone out the window due to COVID, because we were supposed to be built out by now.
Yeah.
And of course, that all got changed with the COVID. So the numbers are definitely not going to be accurate, whatever the forecast was.
It always varies, and yeah, I mean, certainly, you know, things happen within the world or the market that change those. So let us start there. We can email you and Andy in the interim, and then you know, if we kind of get to a point where we need formal board action, we'll of course bring that to a meeting. But let us see with the underwriter first and go from there.
I appreciate that. And the surplus fund, there's like, so we couldn't use any of that money, let's say the 200,000 out of it to pay off the A bond. Can we make an extra payment to the A bond?
With how the bonds are structured and what's within the bond indentures, the district would not legally be able to do that.
Okay. And the way the bonds are written, we have to have that 948,000 in reserve for some reason. What is the reason behind that? In case the whole neighborhood burns down? I mean,
So
why is
the
our balance so much higher than like District 1's? Their balance is 200, their debt balance or whatever is 230. Why is ours 5 times that?
So District 1 is a great example of where they had issued bonds really early on in the stages of the district, and then were able to refinance, get different terms on those bonds, in addition to different interest rates that also decreased the reserve requirement. So District 1 had a longer credit history, near full build out at that point, if not at full build out. So there was more history that made the bonds appear safer, right? And so then you can drop the reserve requirement. So here it's higher, and it's really just built in for reserves. And then if sufficient property taxes are not generated and that surplus fund is depleted, that the bondholders could still get payment on the bonds to pull from that reserve fund. So it's just an additional security for the bondholders.
So I know I'm not part of D2, but just a quick question, Shelby. For B and C bonds, what is the effect if those aren't paid within the 30 years? So if, for some reason, if D2 did lower their mill levy to only focus on the A bond and B and C just continue to grow, and they couldn't make any payments in 30 years, do those bonds stay indentured, or like what happens to those?
Yeah, good question. So there is a discharge date on all of the bonds, which I believe is 10 years after the maturity, which looking in our notes, I think is 2048. So there's a discharge date of 2058. So if there were still amounts outstanding under any of the bonds at December 2058, then those bonds would be considered discharged. That liability essentially written off from the district's books.
Although I'm going to weigh in from the legal standpoint, if the district is not certifying its required mill levy, it would be in violation of all of its bond documents.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. That's a good.
So you would likely be in a default, might be a payment default. So you would, notwithstanding the discharge date, the requirement to certify the required mill levy would be, I'm talking generally speaking, I haven't looked at your bond documents in quite a long time, but generally speaking, you'd be in default under all series of bonds if the board didn't certify the required mill levy.
I think that's the point Keith's getting at. How can we begin to pay those? Or when do we need to? I think there's a lot more this district that meets the eye in terms of the bond.
Do we know what the variation was between the build-out plan that was shown to when the bonds were requested to what we currently are? Like, do we know what that deviation is?
I would have to look into the documents to determine that.
Yeah, I mean, if we told the debt issuer, we'd be fully built out by 2021, and now we're at 2023, and we're not even halfway built out for that district, it'd be really helpful to kind of see like where that deviation happened between what the expected tax revenue was to what it currently is to help D2 make some decisions, I would assume.
Yeah, I mean, what it seems like is District 2 residents are basically in a huge hole now because of Oakwood construction delays, is kind of what I'm hearing. It's a non-accounting individual, simple-minded fellow. I mean, is that kind of what's happening here? Is that it's so delayed? Because I mean, I've heard that construction might not even complete until 2027 or 2028. And I mean, if we were originally projected 2021, we can blame COVID all we want, but I mean, these delays are more than just from COVID. If it's a 6 or 7 year delay that we're looking at.
Yeah, Mitchell, I really can't weigh in on that. Again, I don't know kind of what the projections were initially compared to what they are now. You know, I will note there's a lot of assumptions that are made at the time of doing the bonds and the cash flow forecast. And as we know, projections, you know, pretty much never work out to what they are. But to, you know, kind of what we project or what was projected by this point compared to where we are, I don't know. I can take a look at that and let you all know.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Alyssa, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to point out, but District 2 Board, you know, I've been making notes here with our follow-up items. Are there any other questions specifically on the debt service fund on your budget?
Could you send to me the calculations of how you arrived at all those levies?
At the mill levy?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But I had no idea that you had to do each of the 5. I just assumed you went off the major number calculated.
Yeah, you know,
explain why all the mill levies go up the same amount. Because, which in itself doesn't make sense. You would think that the debt service mill levy would be what was required to pay the debt service. It would move differently than the general mill levy needed to do operations. But they wouldn't move the same rate. They would move to cover the obligations they had to perform.
So for these districts, there's mill levy caps within the service plan. So that's the 50 mills for debt service.
Yeah,
which
we're already over
the 20 mills for operations. Within the service plan, both of those are able to be adjusted with any changes to the assessment rates. So we look at both of those in a similar way, though obviously different amounts. But we'll share the calculations. You know, I will say, again, just for historical purposes, at one point these calculations were much simpler when we were just dealing with the change to the residential assessment rates, and now we're, you know, as we pointed out, kind of adjusting for changes to the assessment rates across almost all property classifications.
One final question. Is it safe to assume that when you did budget 2, you did an estimation of what would happen with each cost?
Correct.
Right. And if I understand my math here, even though the property revenues, everything, villages and whatever, increased to compensate for whatever HH did as a benefit.
Yeah, so Proposition
HH is of no benefit to anybody because you just increased the rates.
So Proposition HH has additional changes to the assessment rates. So it gets the mill levy would be adjusted for that. However, there's an additional just adjustment to the residential values under Proposition HH as well. So ultimately, it does still result in lower revenues for the district because of those value adjustments on the residential properties.
Yeah, but ultimately results in a higher millage levy. So assessment goes up, mill levy.
The mill levy, the mill levy is adjusted up slightly again due to the changes in the assessment rate.
So there's no benefit to HH.
Well, there's
from an individual.
I'm not really in a position to actually give an opinion on that, but there is value adjustment on the residential lots that's not necessarily adjusted for in the mill levy.
All right, I thank you.
Okay.
All right. Shelby, Alyssa, if you don't have any other comments on the other budgets, I think think we've covered a lot of other business. I appreciate everyone's indulgence while I sort of jumped around in planning mode to try to maximize our time and minimize everyone's inbox clutter. With that, there's no action to be taken in today's meeting, so we can adjourn the meetings unless anybody has anything else to add.
Yeah, can the directors of District 2 meet to discuss what's going on, or do we have to file an open meeting and all that?
Yeah, no, you have to, your elected officials, you can only meet at public meetings, which are duly noticed. So no, the majority of the board cannot meet to discuss
We have
without,
a lot to discuss, apparently, don't we?
I'm sorry,
So we have a lot to discuss.
you do. And
So Andy, you can work with Jennifer's team and actually schedule. So I know there's the meeting on the 1st that you guys are going to have, but if you do want additional meetings, you and Mitchell can work together with Jennifer to file an actual meeting, get it on the books, and continue those to have these discussions. But it does need about 1 week notice, our advance notice to go to the town. That's our biggest piece of it. And then you can also do open meeting notices where it's more not of a board meeting, but of a town hall, basically, or
study session.
Yeah, study sessions, so that there's no decisions being made. It's just a discussion, and keep it just to the board and not engage the additional resources of legal or CLA and management teams. So you are able to do that, but there does need to be notice that does go out the door.
Yeah.
But it
And
can still
work.
be. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Jason's fine. We're happy to work with your special counsel once they're engaged next week, like we have with District 1 special counsel, to set up meetings, and we just sort of assist with the notices. And my team doesn't attend the meetings. So we can work through those logistics so that it's maximally efficient for the boards to have those meetings, and you don't have individuals who aren't necessary. So you're not running up, time for accountants to be on if they're not needed, or my team to be on if we're not needed, or management and so forth. So we're happy to help facilitate all of that.
Is there any type of document of what happened in District 1 yesterday? I mean,
Yeah, there's draft minutes that are being prepared. And I think because there was some technical snafus with the meeting link, although the call-in worked, I think District 1 was going to finalize those and get those out to the community in advance of them being approved, so that those can be seen by other folks as well.
all right.
Yeah, because you mentioned right at the get-go with the 1 separated from 4 that there was an implication for District 2. So are someone going to tell us what those implications are, or do we have to wait for that IGA or whatever to come out before we understand, the implications?
Yes, I think that's the purpose of District 2 getting special counsel involved. So your special counsel can talk with the special counsel for District 1, Jeff Erb, and Matt Ruland, who's District 4 special counsel, and work out all of those logistics. And Josh, I see you came off mute, so I don't know if you wanted to add something of what was contemplated, since I wasn't at yesterday's meeting.
Yeah, I was just going to add that. So our special counsel is working with Oakwood and District 4 special counsel to kind of, for lack of a better term, work on, like a joint press release, or at least, some basic details of that settlement agreement. But then, yes, as District 2 engages special counsel, that would open the door to more fulsome discussions around that settlement agreement.
And for me, as part of District 2, I'd like to understand the District 3 piece better, because what I thought to be true, what I was just told isn't true, as far as the budgeting for snow removal and upkeep, yard work and stuff like that gets done. I thought they had a completely separate line item for snow removal for their specific driveways and stuff like that. I was not aware that that was part of our District 2 budget. I thought those two things were separate. And then the fact that District 3 has overlaps that so-called commercial area that's supposed to be District 5.
Yeah, so I brought up a map just to help orient you. District 3 is not on the carriage houses. So the carriage houses,
the original maps had just them as part of District 3.
Yeah. The carriage houses are kind of here where I'm moving my cursor, where you see some green as well. Yes, District 3 was here at one point. which is why you see these roadways that have been dedicated are still in District 3. They're dedicated to the town of Erie, so there's no tax base there. And instead of engaging Erie to have them excluded when that property was moved. But yeah, the carriage houses are here. They're definitely part of District 2. And District 2 and 4 have assessed a fee for those carriage houses to cover the additional costs that are specific to the carriage houses. And that currently gets paid over to District 4, and District 4 provides those extra services.
Okay.
Per the master IGA, which is what's now going to be revised. So part of that discussion might be whether those carriage houses are going to continue to have the extra services provided by 4, or if District 2 wants to manage that since it's within District 2. So that's open for discussion.
Okay. Yeah, because the way I originally understood it was like, for instance, the carriage house would have 2 separate mill levies, one for the District 2 overall budget and a smaller one to cover their special fees. But okay.
Yeah, it's not a mill levy. I just want to be very specific. It's not a mill levy. The mill levy is going to general operations and maintenance that everyone in common is receiving. The fee, which is not a mill levy, the fee,
a fee
for the carriage houses is what covers that delta.
Okay.
Yep.
So
Yeah, Keith, I thought the same thing, Keith. So I thought the driveways were covered on District 3. So it's nice that this map was made so clearly, you know, when all the districts were divided here. So
where it happened to District 5, I don't even see it on there anymore. I thought that was the commercial area, which is the pink stripe, or is it just the outer sidewalk now?
The District 4 and 5 are merely sort of on this outer roadway area, and then this tract H, which is a qualification parcel.
Yeah.
All the districts are here.
Okay. So the commercial area is now considered District 3, which may or may not be built or sold from an email that I got. So to another developer, because I asked that.
All right. With those clarifications, and unless anybody has other business to discuss, we'll go ahead and adjourn the meetings, and thank you everyone for your time today. I'll get out invites for the 2 dates and times that we discussed at the beginning of the meeting, so it's on everybody's calendar, and I'll get out revised invites for next Wednesday that indicate who's actually meeting when, so we'll get all that cleaned up today. Thank you so much for your time, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
I'm going to adjourn the meetings.
Thank you.